listener production.
Hi, Sacha Barbour Gatt with you. Welcome to The Briefing. 9 Australians flew to Bali in 2005. When they attempted to smuggle over 8 kilos of heroin out of Indonesia, they went on to become the Bali Nine. In 2024, 3 of them are dead, 5 remain in prison, and 1 has returned home. But in surprise news this week, we could soon see the remaining 5 return to Australia.
I've never condoned what they've done. I still don't. But is there an opportunity for a change in their lives and the change in the lives of their family? I think it's worth that kind of investment to say, at this stage, after 20 years, we will not give up on you. We will try to set you straight.
Coming up in the second half of this episode is the chat with a key member of the community who is fighting to bring the remaining Bali Nine members home. First, though, let's get into the headlines with Chris Spiru. It's Tuesday, November 26.
Morning, Sash. Morning, everybody. After blocking the bill back in September and refusing to support it, the Greens will help Labor pass its housing policies. It ends a long stalemate between the parties and allows the government to enact 2 key elements of its housing agenda. The Greens had been pushing for Labor to include more protections for renters in the legislation, including changes to negative gearing, rent caps, and more money for social housing. But the government refused to budge, with the Greens relenting yesterday. Max Chandler-Mather, the party's housing spokesperson, got emotional on ABC's 7:30 program last night when asked if he felt he'd let down young voters.
Every day that we don't solve the housing crisis, I feel like I've let them down a little bit, absolutely, because that's the point of politics and I feel it every day.
So what's got the green light? The Help to Buy scheme first off, which will see the government share the cost of a home with 40,000 low and middle income earners. That one's been criticised for helping a very small portion of Australians. The Greens say that it's not really big enough to support lots and lots of people who want to get onto the housing market. Also, Build to Rent, they've agreed to support, and that'll offer incentives to developers who build apartments that are designed for renters. This all comes, Chris, as a new report predicts what house prices are going to do in 2025. It's that time of year when we're starting to look ahead. We can put 2024 to bed. But the SQM researchers' latest boom and bust report is predicting that Sydney and Melbourne house prices will fall next year, but we'll see prices in Perth grow, while the national average house price they're predicting will increase by between 1% and 4%. So that represents a slowing down, but obviously still going up nationally on the average. You know, looking at what the Greens have done here, you know, we heard Chandler-Mather there. He was getting teary and emotional. You know, they were really trying hard to bring in these changes to Labor's housing platforms. And while they have failed in this instance to push their agenda through, don't forget we have an election likely in May next year. And the Greens are going to continue to campaign on things like negative gearing and rent caps. And the interesting thing with next year's election is it's expected to be the first vote where millennials and Gen Z will outnumber the older generations. So things like housing are topics that really do impact younger voters. So it'll be really interesting to see if that's a winner for the Greens. But if you're listening to this and you want to get across what all of the major parties, so Labor, the Coalition and the Greens, are promising for you for housing, we did cover that in a 3-part series back in September. So scroll back to the 24th, 25th and 26th of that month.
Over to the Middle East now, where Israeli officials say their security cabinet will meet later tonight to decide on a ceasefire deal with Lebanon. The 3 main parts to this agreement, brokered by the US, is that the IDF would withdraw entirely from southern Lebanon. The militant group Hezbollah would move its heavy weapons at least 25 kilometres north of the Israeli border, and the Lebanese army, alongside an existing UN peacekeeping force, would then move in to secure the border over a 60-day transition period. So one of the sticking points, Sash, to this that Lebanese officials say has now been resolved is who exactly would be keeping an eye over the compliance of this ceasefire deal, and an agreement has been struck to establish a 5-country monitoring committee. So while we don't know the full list just yet, we do know it will be chaired by the US and include France.
According to a spokesperson for the Israeli PM, Benjamin Netanyahu has approved this plan in principle, but the country's UN ambassador has said the deal can't rule out the possibility of striking southern Lebanon should the need arise. Netanyahu has been facing quite a bit of domestic pressure to get this done, given that it would enable 60,000 displaced Israelis from the border region to return to their homes after more than a year of fighting. And look, more than 3,500 people have been killed in Lebanon in that period of time as well. So yeah, this vote will happen tonight, our time, and we'll see if Israel agrees to it.
Back home now, a hurried Senate inquiry looking into the impending social media ban for Australians under the age of 16 has received a flood of submissions, including from Meta, Google and X. More than 15,000 submissions were sent on the only day the Senate inquiry was accepting them. And to put that into perspective, they usually get hundreds rather than thousands for similar inquiries.
For example, the gay marriage plebiscite in 2017, that inquiry received about 28,000 submissions, which goes to show this one is capturing people's attention. People want to have their say on it, right? And so among those making submissions are the companies that it's going to directly affect. Google has slammed the Australian government's decision to race through this legislation without finishing up a trial of age verification technology. So the company said in its submission that it did not reflect good regulatory practice and consideration of the bill should be delayed until this trial is completed. Meta backed that idea. Meta owns Facebook and Instagram. Also criticised the bill as being inconsistent and ineffective, saying it would fail to achieve its stated goals without more consultation. Not surprising that these companies are taking this kind of contrary position, given that they're the ones that are going to have to make all these changes on their platforms. X came out to question the legality of the ban in its submission and said it's reserving its legal rights. In a quote from the submission, it said, "We have serious concerns as to the lawfulness of the bill, including its compatibility with other regulations and laws, including international human rights treaties." Now, what it's referring to here is young people and saying that if you take away their access to things like social media, you're taking away their access to information, freedom of speech, freedom of information, all of that.
Oh, gosh. And I mean, a lot of this chatter around the social media ban has been the negatives, and we're seeing, especially with these companies, they're pointing out the flaws in this. Something that I liked, Sarah Hanson-Young from The Greens, she was on Insiders on the ABC on the weekend, and she was just bringing up all these ideas that honestly are pretty good at combating this issue of social media harm and kids. And she was talking about algorithm changes. She was talking about rather, instead of asking them to implement age verification tools, rather asking them to make sure that the content that kids are being fed on their algorithms, on TikTok, on Facebook, on Instagram, is monitored and is, tailored for children. So I think that's a really interesting thing to this, and something that could honestly be a promising solution as opposed to a blanket ban.
Popular. You're gonna be popular.
And yes, we're going to talk about Wicked, which has been dominating not only the box office, but also our social media feeds and TV screens. The highly anticipated movie adaptation of the insanely popular musical made its debut over the weekend, becoming the second biggest release in Australia in 2024. According to Universal Pictures, which made the film, Wicked grossed $10.3 million at the Aussie box office over the weekend, but it is behind Deadpool and Wolverine for the biggest opening days of 2024. Sash.
I thought it would eclipse Deadpool. I really did. I feel like it's like theatre kids versus like comic kids, right?
Yeah, it actually
that
is.
are at war with this one. I haven't seen Wicked yet. I've already got plans to take my mum for her birthday. We went to see the stage show together. Actually, I think it was this year. And she loved it. She's like, "Oh, that was brilliant." So we're going to go watch the movie. It's been really interesting watching the commentary. You said it's all over our social media feeds, and it's so true. The one that we've seen this week, the holding space.
Yeah.
So if anyone doesn't know, there was all these press interviews that Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo have been doing together. People are kind of finding them a little bit cringy. And so this interviewer said, there's all these people holding space for the lyrics of Defying Gravity. And if you're listening to that and going, what does that mean? That's what most of the internet felt as well. And, it's quite funny to watch everyone get in a flap over what at the end of the day is a movie. But people are loving it. It's getting really good reviews. And remember, this is part one. There's a second part coming as well. So for anyone, all the theatre kids out there who are loving this, enjoy.
Yeah, I don't don't know about you, but I've been avoiding any spoilers online. Like, honestly, I'm approaching socials now with so much caution, and I'm just scrolling anytime people are filming from the cinema. Something I have avoided, which did drop over the weekend, was the soundtrack. So there is the whole soundtrack. If you want to enjoy it, you can. But look, I haven't seen Wicked. I don't even know what the story's about. I know that it is something to do with the Wizard of Oz, and I know that it's about the two witches. So if you don't want to spoil it, don't listen to the soundtrack like I did, because I think I ruined the movie for myself.
I just find it weird that you know the songs, but you haven't seen the stage play.
Correct.
It's quite bizarre. Well, whatever, you'll see it eventually. Chris, thank you so much. It is time to get into our deep dive now. We're looking at the Bali Nine and a bold new plan that could see the 5 that are still behind bars return to Australia.
It was 2005 when a group of Australians were caught at an Indonesian airport with 8.3 kilograms of heroin strapped to their bodies. They would become known as the Bali Nine.
If you grew up in Australia, chances are you've heard of the Bali Nine. This was a group of 9 Aussies that attempted to smuggle more than 8 kilos of heroin worth more than $4 million out of Indonesia and into Australia in April of 2005. Caught by Indonesian authorities, they came to be known as the Bali Nine.
I feel desperately sorry for the parents of these people, but the warnings have been there for decades.
The ringleaders were Andrew Chen and Mayuran Sukumaran. Working alongside them, C.E. Chen, Michael Chugai, Tanduk Than Nguyen, Matthew Norman, Scott Rush, Martin Stevens and Renee Lawrence. Renee Lawrence went on to receive a 20-year sentence. She was released in 2018. That same year, Nguyen, who got a life sentence, died of cancer. Chen, Chugai, Norman, Rush and Stevens also received life sentences. But despite pleas to spare them of the death penalty, Andrew Chan and Mayuran Sukumaran were sentenced to death and executed on the 29th of April 2015.
Australia deeply, deeply regrets these executions in Indonesia. Our ambassador will be withdrawn.
To say it was a significant story and moment in Australian-Indo relations is an understatement. And it looks like there is a major development underway. Almost 20 years since their arrests, the remaining members of the Bali Nine could be returning home.
This is a matter of concern to the Albanese government, and we've consistently advocated their cause.
During a meeting in Peru last week, the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, raised the remaining group's possible repatriation during a meeting with new Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto. Word is, Indonesia's on board. So when will we know the outcome of these negotiations, and should we be making space in Aussie jails for convicted drug smugglers? Joining me now is Bishop Timothy Harris. He's a long-time advocate for the release of the Bali Nine, having visited members of the group at the notorious Kerobokan prison in Indonesia and also working with the group's families back home. Bishop, welcome to the briefing. Tell me how you first heard about the Bali Nine.
I was on holidays at Surfers Paradise, of all places, would you believe, and I turned on the news and the whole unfolding drama of the Bali Nine began. Now, why this caught my attention was that I happened to be the parish priest of Kirinda Graceful Parish in Brisbane, and the names of these Scott Rush and Michael Chugai, they talked about Chilma and Kirinda, where they lived. So I immediately thought, that's in my area. So I made a few phone calls. I didn't know the families prior to this, or even Scott and Michael. So I made a phone call to someone who should have known, and they let me know that both those boys one was at St Joseph's Kirinda and the other one was at Christ the King Graceful. So from there, Sacha, I reached out just pastorally and made contact with the families and simply tried to say to them, well, look, I'm here for you. I'm here to support you, and that's how all this started.
Why do you think there's a sudden appetite from the Australian government to bring them home?
I mean, that's a good question, Sacha. I mean, I think the time has come. I mean, 20 years incarcerated in a foreign country, I think the time has come. There's only so many, if you can sort of describe, if I could describe it this way, there's only so many times you can use a sledgehammer to crack a nut, if you can just think that through. In other words, how much incarceration, how much punishment is necessary for someone to turn their lives around. I know that Scott and others have apologised to the Indonesian government, and they mean that sincerely. I know that Scott and the others have said sorry many times. People are realising, well, I'm hoping people are. There will always be people who take a hard line. There will be people in Indonesia, in the government, the parts of the government that will take a hard line. There'll be people in this country, in our government, that will take a hard line and sort of say, well, these people should never be, released. But I think, for me, we have got to reach into our hearts, all of us. What they did, what the Bali Nine did, was a crime. It was wrong. But do we completely sort of lock them up and throw away the key? Or do we say, we're going to give you a chance to put things right back in your home country? They've had 20 years in a foreign country to try to put things right. But I think surrounded by their family and friends here in Australia, I think they've got a better chance of the transition they need to make than they would remaining where they are. How productive is, life incarceration? How productive is it for the individual, or do we do what we can to kind of rehabilitate? And that's what I'm speaking about today, I guess.
Is the understanding that they will come back to Australia to continue serving those life sentences, or is the hope that they'll eventually be released?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question, and no one really knows that. This is why I'm being particularly cautious. And I want to stress, because it's a very important point to make, that we have to respect the Indonesian justice processes. And I do, I know the families do. So this is up to the Indonesian government to continue these conversations with the Australian government. The Prime Minister of this country and the President of Indonesia are speaking. We can't forget that countries have positions on this, and people go there, I guess, knowing to some degree the risks involved. But these were young people that were silly, that were misguided, that were conned, if you like, into accepting, I think, $10,000 each, the mules, that is, the drug mules. Scott certainly was offered $10,000 and given that and said, you play your part, and that's all we want you to do. And, of course, what happens? Well, the rest is history.
There are going to be people, and I've heard your point, but there are going to be people who are arguing, well, why are we making space either in Aussie jails or in our community for people who have openly admitted to the crimes that they've been accused of and have acknowledged it? What do you say to those people who don't want those sort of people in Australia?
Well, they are Australians. My view is that we don't give up on anybody. I'm not sure that people fully appreciate what 20 years of incarceration does to the human body. There's issues of nutrition and all those kinds of things, and the health of one's body, one's teeth, psychologically. Now, if an arrangement is made between the Australian government and the Indonesian government, if an arrangement can be made, then those kinds of things would be particularly looked at. Obviously, bringing someone back home, the doctors here would have to completely check them all out. You can have the line, close the door, lock the cell, and leave people there forever. I just don't, in this particular case, I do not think that is productive or the right thing to do. I think we've got to help these people. I mean, to be locked away for 20 years. Just think about this. Would we want our son and daughter to be locked away for 20 years? It's all very well and good for people to make comments that are derogatory in relation to this, and people do because they're from a distance. But when you know, as I do, I have some insight into the anguish of the prisoners and also the anguish of the families, I have a place in my heart that says to me, I've never condoned what they've done, I still don't, but is there an opportunity for a change in their lives and the change in the lives of their family? I think it's worth that kind of investment to say at this stage, after 20 years, we will not give up on you, we will try to set you straight.
We don't know what the plan is, whether it's to bring them home to continue serving their sentences or whether there's the hope of bringing them home to rejoin society. Would you support the move if it meant they were coming back to be in jail?
I will support whatever arrangements both governments land on. I mean, it's not up to me to determine their future in that sense. That will be the result of very sensitive conversations between two governments. And I have to respect, as I said, I've got to respect the Indonesian justice system, and I've got to respect the Prime Minister and the government of this country, and hope and pray. I am a Catholic bishop, so I'm hoping and praying that they will be able to settle on something that is acceptable to both sides, that both sides can live with. I haven't heard anywhere where they're just going to be set free.
Bishop Tim, before we let you go, have you spoken to any of the 9 or their families to see how they're feeling at this sudden, hopeful burst of news that they might be coming home?
I've certainly spoken to Scott Rush's father, and I've kept in fairly close contact with him. He and the family obviously are hoping that all this comes true. I'm doing what I can pastorally. I'm no longer their pastor as such because I'm no longer their parish priest living in that part of the world. I'm now in North Queensland. But for the last 20 years, and when I left there to go to the Gold Coast as parish priest and then here to become bishop 7 years ago, I've continued the contact through emails and phone calls and messages to the family, and they know that I've got their back. And they know that I have been very concerned about Scott. But to their credit, and this gives you an insight, the kind of people we're talking about, they sort of said, look, we're very happy if Scott could come home, but we'd be very happy. But, they also hope and pray that all the remaining Bali Nine also come home. So I think there's a sense that it's not just about Scott, it's about all of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Bishop Tim Harris, thank you so much for your time. We do appreciate it.
That's okay. All the best, Sacha.
That was Bishop Timothy Harris speaking with me there. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of The Briefing. That is it for now. Before you go, we'd really appreciate it if you could share this ep with someone you think might get something out of it. It is a really great and easy way you can help us keep doing what we do here at The Briefing. Of course, the other way you can support us is through our socials. We are on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. Also, check us out on TikTok and YouTube. Search Listener Newsroom. Don't forget to subscribe, like, follow, comment, all that good stuff. And we'll be back in your feed with another ep this afternoon from 3. I'm Sacha Barbour Gatt. See you next time.
Listener.